We've all heard the story of Montgomery's legendary stand in North Africa at the Battle of El Alamein. Winston Churchill called it the end of the beginning. History books paint it as a turning point, a masterpiece of tactical genius where one of Britain's greatest generals, named Bernard Montgomery, brilliantly outwitted the legendary Desert Fox, Erwin Rommel. The Second Battle of El Alamein is remembered as a clean, decisive victory, won by a brilliant general against an almost mythical foe. But is that what really happened? This wasn't some dramatic duel of generals on an even playing field. This was a battle of attrition. It was won not by a single stroke of genius, but by overwhelming, soul-crushing superiority in men and machines. This supposed triumph was actually a slow, expensive and grinding battle that looked a lot more like the Western Front of World War I than a flashy desert maneuver. And in the end, this methodical victory allowed the core of Rommel's Panzer army to slip away, stretching out the war in North Africa. This is the story of how El Alamein was really won, and how its powerful legend hides a much more complicated and uncomfortable truth. For decades, the story has been neat. Monty, fresh from London, took a demoralized 8th Army and, through brilliant planning, executed Operation Lightfoot and Operation Supercharge. The plan was a feint in the north, a decisive breakthrough, and a rapid mobile sweep that would envelop the weakened Axis line. It's presented as the moment Montgomery finally outfoxed Rommel. But let's look at the numbers. They tell a different story, one of simple, overwhelming industrial might. When the battle began on October 23rd, 1942, the Allies didn't just have an edge, they had a mountain of resources. Allied forces numbered 195,000 troops against the Axis's 116,000. The Allies fielded 1,029 operational tanks, including hundreds of new American M3 Grants and M4 Shermans, against the Axis's meager 490. That's a greater than 2-to-1 advantage in the primary offensive weapon. The advantage in artillery was similar, with over 900 Allied guns to the Axis's 550. But the most critical factor wasn't the equipment on the field, it was the logistics behind it. The Axis were literally running on fumes. Rommel had stretched his supply lines to the breaking point. The fuel, ammunition and spares he desperately needed were at the bottom of the Mediterranean, sunk by the Royal Navy and Allied aircraft. Meanwhile, thanks to the Allied control of the sea and the flood of American Lend-Lease supplies, Monty had literally mountains of shells and barrels of fuel. The unsung heroes weren't on the front line. They were the logistics staff and the material delivered by figures like Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks. Monty was the face, but the Allied assembly line won the war. Before we get to the battle itself, I want to throw a question out to you guys. If Rommel actually had the fuel and the supplies he needed, do you think his tactical genius could have overcome a 2-to-1 disadvantage? Or was the sheer weight of Allied industry inevitable, regardless of Rommel's skill? Let me know your take in the comments below. Now, when you have a 2-to-1 advantage in every category, you don't need a clever flanking maneuver. You need brute force. To give Montgomery credit where it's due, he was smart enough to know his own limitations. He realized he couldn't outdance the Desert Fox in a mobile battle. Rommel was too good at that. So Monty decided not to dance at all. Instead, he turned the vast desert into a claustrophobic boxing ring where he could lean on his opponent with his massive weight advantage. Montgomery's plan wasn't designed for a quick, decisive thrust. It was designed for a direct frontal assault aimed at grinding the German and Italian defenders into dust. His philosophy was clear: we will hit them and we will keep hitting them until they break. He was counting on his enormous reserves to absorb losses and keep the pressure relentless. The battle began with the largest artillery barrage seen since the First World War. For 5 hours the sky rained steel. This wasn't mobility, this was sheer, overwhelming firepower, breaking the lines before the tanks even moved. The initial assault, Operation Lightfoot, was brutal. Despite the overwhelming advantage, the first planned breakthrough failed. It was not a smooth drive, but a chaotic slog through dense minefields and determined Axis resistance. It took 8 days of agonizing, slow, bloody fighting, a massive human cost, to achieve what was supposed to be a rapid opening. The crucial breakthrough, Operation Supercharge, was equally agonizing. The legend often skips over the fact that British armoured divisions repeatedly suffered massive losses and failed to exploit gaps. Ultimately, it was the Australian forces and other Allied infantry units, fighting with incredible tenacity in a slow war of manoeuvre through the gaps, who created the decisive pressure, not some rapid, brilliant armoured thrust. This was a war of material endurance, not finesse. Rommel didn't lose El Alamein due to poor generalship. He lost because he was paralysed. His genius always lay in mobility and manoeuvre, but at El Alamein, his tanks were effectively static pillboxes because he had no fuel to move them. This was a position he had repeatedly warned his command about. The greatest mobile general of the war was beaten by static logistics. When he finally recognised the untenable position, Rommel tried to initiate a retreat. However, his withdrawal was severely delayed by Hitler's foolish order to hold fast at all costs. This delay proved catastrophically expensive, sacrificing thousands of troops and vital equipment that could have been saved to fight later. And here is the most uncomfortable truth about Montgomery's victory. While the Axis forces were defeated tactically, the British forces failed to trap or destroy the army entirely. The core of the Panzer Army, Rommel's most experienced and dangerous troops, managed to organize a brilliant fighting withdrawal. They escaped across Libya and into Tunisia, stretching out the war in North Africa for another 6 months. For a battle touted as a complete knockout blow, it was an incomplete victory. So, why was the myth of the brilliant tactical genius created? Britain desperately needed a heroic figure and a success story after years of humiliating defeats at Dunkirk and Singapore. Montgomery provided the face, and the official narrative provided the much-needed morale boost. But the myth of Monty's genius obscured the importance of the real engine of victory: Allied industrial output, American lend-lease, and the tireless logistics crews. If you like this story, you'll enjoy our next video featuring Havildar Prakash Singh. He faced down Japanese anti-tank guns in an unarmoured carrier to save his friends from certain death in the Burmese jungle. It's a story of absolute defiance that history almost forgot. Click here to watch it now.